me. So I have Lenny Harper is a former police chief who was sent to Jersey to investigate allegations of child abuse in Jersey's institutions in 2002. And we have Neil McMurray, who is a citizen journalist, and as he is described on Twitter, exposing what Jersey's state media won't. And Neil not only reports on the abuse and corruption that's taking place on the island, but he's talked to all the leading whistleblowers, including the police and politicians. So I'd just like to give a bit of background, and that is for anybody unaware, and I doubt there is, but Jersey, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a British Crown dependency and the largest of the Channel Islands. It's situated fairly near to France. I think it's the second island which is the closest to France. It has its own financial, legal and judicial system, and it's not part of the United Kingdom, but the UK is constitutionally responsible for the defence of Jersey. So that's a bit of background. Jersey has been riddled with allegations, not even just allegations, but corruption for decades, hasn't it? Let's start, first of all, with you, Neil. Why did you start getting involved with, as you say, exposing what Jersey's state media won't?
Well, I became aware of abuse and everything that was going on in certain places in the island, and I took my concerns to the correct channels, shall we say. This is before Operation Rectangle, before Mr. Harper, well, before we knew Mr. Harper was investigating the child abuse. And I realised by going through the correct channels, including the media, I got to a stage where I thought, well, my only place left to go is the media with my concerns. And then it became apparent that they were covering it up as well. So I didn't know where to go, where to turn. I went out and bought myself a computer and got on the internet and see if I could just get my word out somewhere on the internet. And I started up a blog site. And because I named an alleged abuser, the Jersey law officers, I'm sure we'll come on to the Jersey law officers department later on, they got that blog site closed down. So I started up another one and was a lot more careful with what I said. You've got to remember, I said, I'm not a journalist. I'm just, a father of two children who's scared, who needs to protect them and other children on this island. So I ended up with getting a blog site, get my blog site running, and started putting as much information as I could out there. See, I thought if you started just a blog site, I knew nothing about the internet. And I thought, well, if I put it on the internet, millions of people are going to see it of what I'm writing. But of course, how wrong I was getting like, at the beginning about 10 hits a day and no comments on my blog. But that's where it started. And then, of course, along came Operation Well, before that, along came the health minister at the time, Senator Stuart Sivray, and he was blowing the whistle on child abuse over here. I thought, I know exactly what he's talking about. I know, and I made contact with him. I got him to start up a blog site. And then, of course, Operation Rectangle came out, and what Mr. Harper was saying. As a senior investigating officer, we thought, God, great, somebody's telling the truth, somebody's speaking up, somebody's speaking out against this child abuse. And we couldn't believe it because there was a good straight cop,
Right.
And so yeah, that was the start of it.
Well, let's bring Lenny in at this point. So Lenny, you're obviously, as I say, former police chief. You were sent to Jersey to investigate the allegations. Obviously, I interviewed in 2013. You told me some fairly horrendous stuff then that had happened. Now there's even more time between then and now, and you've been able to get a bigger overview picture. But take us back to when you first arrived on the island, and what were your sort of initial thoughts?
Well, just a slight correction to begin with.
Go on.
I actually wasn't sent there to investigate the child abuse allegations. Those occurred much later into my tenure. I went there as Jersey had advertised for a head of operations with a view to becoming the next deputy chief there. And I went there, and it wasn't too long before I started encountering what became known to me later on as the Jersey Way. There were a few bits and pieces about the way that female officers were being treated and minority officers were being treated. that rose its head early on. But the first real clash with the Jersey establishment and the first real clash with the Jersey culture came as a result of our looking at firearms and the firearms registration on the island. Now, the firearms registration on the island dealt with firearms certificates, and the possession of firearms were authorised then, and I believe still are, by the constables of each parish, which is the head of the honorary police in each parish. Nothing to do with the States of Jersey Police. And how we got very interested in it was we had a firearms clerk, and there was a man arrested for firearms offences who told us that our States of Jersey Police firearms clerk was giving information to criminals that we held on them. But not only that, was also buying and selling and taking possession of guns that were being handed in by members of the public and were being sold back out again. And when we started looking at it, well, the first thing we did was to arrest our firearms clerk. And even then, at this stage, we didn't have an idea of the political ramifications that were going to arise from this. We went to his house and we found an absolute treasure trove. We were met at the door by his, I think he was 4-year-old son, carrying a Magnum 45 revolver in his hand.
Oh my goodness.
in his night clothes. And fortunately, the revolver was unloaded. But when we went into the house, we found an absolute stash of firearms. We should have had some hint, because on the porch, on the roof of his porch, as we approached the house, was a Sea Cat missile launcher.
Right. Oh my God.
In the house, we found high velocity NATO rifles. We found Magnum revolvers. We found hundreds.
Oh no!
Ammunition.
Oh no!
And we also found an RPG-7 rocket launcher.
Wow.
I think during the whole of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, they only recovered 3 RPGs rocket launchers. Wow. We found this one in Jersey, and there was very little wrong with it. There was a broken catch on it somewhere, but it could easily have been repaired. Anyway, we charged him, and he was convicted of unlawful possession of firearms and ammunition. Most of the charges were dropped because he pleaded guilty to 1 charge. And so we then disciplined him, and Graham sat on the discipline board, Graham Power, the chief police, and Graham dismissed him, as I recall. But because of the strange sort of thing that was going, the strange situation in Jersey, what was the Home Affairs Committee then, who were responsible for the policing, they rescinded Graham's decision and made us take him back again.
Oh, wow.
So,
that tells you so much, doesn't it? Already, we'll get around to Graham Power, obviously, but that already tells you so much about how the island was operating.
So what we did was we tried to keep him away from sensitive information from then on in. We had no choice but to take him back, but then we caught him again, unlawfully accessing information on our computers, and we forced him out this time. But as a little postscript, again, which goes to show the situation in Jersey, a few years later, I found out that he was within 24 hours of being sworn into the honorary police on the island. Now, the titular head of the honorary police is the Attorney General. So one is entitled to assume that the Attorney General knew all about this man's pending swearing in. I disclosed everything to the Attorney General, and his swearing in was postponed, but I later found out that he was sworn in and became an honorary policeman later on. So we started then looking at the firearm certificates, and we found out that although there were over 10,000 firearms on Jersey, and mind you, Jersey was an island of 80,000 people, there were 10,000 firearms for a population of 80,000. On those certificates that were supposed to be held, 6.5 million rounds of ammunition could be held in Jersey, and that's not counting, that wasn't counting firearms dealers.
Right.
Now, from 2001, I think, through to 2006, only 3 applications for firearms were refused. Now, when we started examining it, hardly anybody had bothered to renew their certificates. Nobody.
Right.
Basically nobody. And there were semi-automatic rifles. There were NATO 7.62 rifles. There was even a couple of 50 caliber rifles, which can bring down airplanes. Now, us looking at this, there were so many of them that we couldn't arrest them immediately. And also there were politicians, honorary police officers, lawyers. A lot of Jersey's elite had not bothered to renew their certificates. So what we did was we gave them a 3-month amnesty to renew their certificates. It was just impossible for a small force to start arresting everybody there and then. So we gave them a 3-month amnesty. But it started a political storm. Politicians rounded on us. The states, the parliament, the states rounded on us, accused us of being arrogant, accused us of being at odds with the wishes of the politicians who we were accountable to. The Home Affairs Committee rounded on us and says that we were Brits who didn't understand the Jersey way of life, that we were trying to turn Jersey into Basingstoke, I think, on one. And then another prominent politician said to me, "Sonny, this is not Dunblane."
Right. Okay. Interesting.
So we after 3 months, hardly any of them had bothered. It showed the arrogance and the confidence of them. Hardly any of them had bothered.
Right.
So we started arresting them. And again, we just walked into an absolute storm. And the final twist was the magistrate who was hearing when we charged them, they went in front of a magistrate. There were guys in possession, unlawfully in possession of high caliber, high velocity firearms. There was one guy who had 10,000 firearms held on his, one guy who had 10,000 rounds of ammunition on each of his certificates. He held a huge stock of weapons. He had convictions for armed robbery. He had convictions for unlawful possession of firearms and for supplying drugs. The magistrate at the time was giving them a £50 fine for these offences. And the magistrate criticised us for being, and I quote, he said, "The States of Jersey Police are out of control. They're acting as if they're an independent organisation."
Right.
That magistrate later became the Home Affairs Minister.
Right.
So
and that is the problem.
Not so much in a nutshell. That was my first clash with the authorities in Jersey.
Let me bring back in Neil for this. Neil, tell us about the Jersey way. I know you've written about it. You know what Len is talking about. Fill us all in.
Well, the Jersey way, you might know, we just had you've got ICSA at the minute, the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse. We've had one similar in Jersey, and recommendation 7 of the care inquiry was to look at the Jersey way. Some people will say, certainly the establishment will say it's a positive thing and it's how people get involved in the community and everything, but the vast majority of people see it as corruption, complicity, secret court cases, deals done behind closed doors. That is the Jersey way. Anybody who speaks up and speaks out basically gets annihilated by the establishment. And it's quite, because you mentioned about the media, why I report on this. If you remember, last time you interviewed Lenny, Mr. Harper, is the bad press that Lenny was getting, Mr. Harper.
We're going to get to that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry vindicated not only the abuse survivors, the whistleblowers, Mr. Harper, myself, Rico Sorda, the bloggers. We were basically all vindicated by this Independent Jersey Care Inquiry, although Operation Rectangle was attacked by the media, the bloggers were attacked by the media. So, we got vindication.
I should say it's very brave of you to speak out, Neil. I know it's not easy. I've seen various vox pops that take place on the streets of Jersey. Everybody's fine to talk until you want to ask them about what's actually really going on in Jersey, and they're petrified because it's a small place where everybody knows everybody. And my hat, honestly, I take my hat off to all of the bloggers that you've just mentioned. Absolutely brilliant. All the whistleblowers, amazing. So Lenny, let us talk about Operation Rectangle. And because Neil has just touched upon it, and then I want to bring us to the care inquiry that happened after that. So Lenny, after that initial experience, when it became apparent that they really wanted their police to be a certain way, and you unfortunately were probably a bit too questioning for that, what was the first point when you realised that there was an issue with child abuse on the island?
Well, one of the lawyers who was attached to police headquarters as the liaison, and sort of it was a near split there was to the CPS in Jersey. The Attorney General attached, I think at the time it was 3 lawyers to police headquarters, and one of those lawyers, I used to have daily chats with him, and he was very, very concerned that he felt that there was a paedophile ring on the island. And he also was very, very concerned because he found it impossible to get prosecutions for child sexual offences against children. And he took me into his confidence, and he said that there were cases where he was convinced there was more than enough evidence to prosecute, and he was refused the authority to do that by the Attorney General's office. And as a result of what he was telling me, we started a review of a lot of old cases. And we turned up some very, very worrying aspects of cases where evidence seemed to have been overlooked, either deliberately or carelessly. There was also an issue with the head of the Sea Cadets in Jersey, who had been found with child pornography on his computer. And when this came to pass, I gave all the information to the Sea Cadet authorities in Jersey and asked them to suspend this guy, and they refused. I won't go into the lengthy details, but I ended up having to do an elaborate charade with the head of the Sea Cadets from England, who was across visiting Jersey for Remembrance Sunday. They refused to hand me over files. And eventually I threatened to go and stand, if they didn't suspend this guy, I threatened to go and stand at the gates of Sea Cadets headquarters in Jersey and hand out leaflets to the parents coming with their children to the Sea Cadets.
That's insane.
It was insane. And so we started looking at all of this, and we kept it secret for a few months while we looked at it. We had to keep it secret because there was aspects which were coming back into police headquarters as well, and we had problems with leaks, and we had such a intertangled web in Jersey at the time, so we kept it very much under our hats. But before we were actually ready to go public, we found out that Stuart Sivery, who was doing his work on behalf of the abuse victims, and that cost him dearly, as Neil alluded to a minute ago. We found out Stuart was bringing a BBC group across. Mind you, if we knew now about the BBC what we knew then, we probably wouldn't have bothered.
Well, I know, but we all give it a shot, don't we?
But so we sort of thought, well, we're going to have to go public. And we went public the next day, and I think that the first moment when I realized that things were, because I just naively assumed at that stage, even though there had been problems in past years, the abuse victims had been bullied, and that they had tried to report it previously, had been swept onto the carpet, they'd been threatened, they'd been bullied. Naively, I thought that those days had gone. And I thought that everybody would be on board, but I got summoned to the Chief Minister's office the following day. And I got told in no uncertain terms that I was to drop the investigation and back off. And of course, Graham Power was there with me, and Graham wouldn't hear of it, and neither would I. Graham fully backed the investigation and went through a very difficult time as a result of it. But then we were told that we were to stop referring to people as victims, and it got really nasty from then on in, and it went through the whole way where there were we had a lot of intelligence and evidence coming in. There were some very, very prominent people in Jersey being nominated as suspects for this abuse inquiry. And among them, one or two who were very close to the Attorney General's office, as well as senior officials in the child care system. So as we went down the road, and we no doubt come to it later, the law officer's office were continually trying to get access to our information, and they did it in several different ways. And one of the ways they later was to try and force what they told us was an independent child abuse lawyer from London onto us. And again, we'll probably come to that later, but just to summarize it, I really objected to that because they wanted him right in our incident office, where he would see all the intelligence coming in through our office. But I was assured that he was independent, he was a child abuse expert, and so it came to transpire later on that he was neither independent nor a child abuse expert. He'd never dealt with any child abuse cases. He was actually, in fact, a lawyer who specialized in financial crimes. And just by total coincidence, of course, the chambers that he belonged to had done millions of pounds worth of work for the Jersey Attorney General's Law Officers Department in respect to financial crimes. So that was the sort of pressure that we were under all the time. Politicians were banging on to Graham Power every day of the week to try and sack me. Right. Graham refused. They went after Graham. And of course, we all know what happened to Graham later on. But continually, as I was getting on with the investigation, Graham was having to bat off pressures, which I suspect that I don't even know to this day.
Right.
All of the pressures and all of the threats and the cajoling that he had to go through in respect of getting rid of myself.
Right. So Neil, this is where I'd like to bring you back in, because all this while you were observing what was happening with Lenny, what was being said about Lenny in the press. And obviously, Lenny, once you started to look into Haute de la Garenne, which was probably the most famous orphanage on Jersey, I think, and you started to discover certain things, didn't you? We're going to go to Neil shortly, but what were you discovering?
Well, we got information from a number of sources, including a lawyer, that children had gone missing at the home. And we also had statements from a couple of people saying that they'd seen what they believed to be bodies at the home. And there were also disturbing allegations of youngsters throwing themselves out of the top floor windows and never being seen again, and children being dragged out of their beds at night. Now, we went to the UK and we liaised very closely with the homicide working group in the UK. We didn't just fly off on our own say-so and do it, but we went to the UK and we worked out a plan along with the homicide working group in the UK, and they were very much in support of us going and excavating Haute de la Garenne to see if we could find anything. And this time, of course, we had hundreds of allegations of abuse, both sexual and physical. And it became apparent we believed that we would have to go in, and the homicide working group supported that and says, yeah, you must go in, you've no choice. So what we did originally was we set out a survey rather than anything else. We didn't go in with diggers and all the rest of it to begin with. We went in just to sort of do a 3-day examination of the scene. And we took a couple of, we took a cadaver dog in with us, who became quite famous in his own right.
Ed, was that Eddie?
That was Eddie. That was Eddie.
Eddie, who obviously was later used in the Madeleine McCann case in Prada-Luz.
Yeah, I think he was actually used in the Madeleine McCann case before he came to us.
Oh, was it before? Yeah, right, okay.
Before he came to us. And I was one of Eddie's biggest fans and remain so to this day, because I've seen what he could do.
Right.
The disturbing thing about it is as well too, that a lot of the politicians who were criticizing the inquiry and were criticizing the dogs also saw what those dogs could do.
Yeah.
They knew full well, because I made sure that I showed the politicians in great detail what the dogs could do.
Right.
So that was it. We went in there for a 3-day recce, as we would call it, totally planned and totally set out with objectives and all the rest of it by the homicide working group in England. And that's where we were at the getting towards the end of February.
Right. Neil, so you were observing this, Neil, obviously, and as you'd said at the start, you know, one of the reasons why you felt the need to come out and report what the state media was in part because of what Lenny was enduring. So what were you witnessing Lenny was going through in the media?
Well, again, you know, because in 2008, Lenny retired and he was replaced by Mick Gradwell. And then what you've got to remember is in November 2008, Lenny had retired, Mr. Harper had retired, but then the chief of police, Mr. Graham Power, was suspended on what's now been found to be a pack of lies.
Right.
So he told our Parliament in a secret court case, in a secret parliamentary sitting, that he had seen this damning report from the Metropolitan Police. Now, the Hansard or the transcripts of this Parliament sitting was never supposed to see the light of day.
Right.
But that Hansard was leaked to the bloggers.
Right.
And we discovered that basically he had been telling contrary statements to other reviews that were going on. He had told other investigations, this Home Affairs Minister who suspended the Chief of Police, he had been telling other inquiries that he hadn't seen the Metropolitan Police report.
Right.
But of course, then this gets leaked.
But meantime, when Lenny was going through what he was with Haute de la Garenne, the newspapers on the mainland were laying into him with a savagery because, as you pointed out to me, there were 65 children's teeth and quantity of bones found. So give us some insight about what you're observing they were attempting to do to Lenny from the outside.
Well, when you mention the 65 children's teeth, some still had roots attached and couldn't have been shed naturally. Now, and it's one of Mr. Harper's. It's a quote of his I'll never forget. You know, that this wouldn't make for a credible fictitious story. Now, the official line for those 65 teeth, some with roots still attached, was the lead investigator who took over from Mr. Harper said they were left there for the tooth fairy. The Home Affairs Minister at the time, he was Senator Ian Lamarck, former magistrate, he said those 65 children's teeth, possibly from 65 different children, fell through a gap in a floorboard. So they've basically fallen out of a child's mouth in the exact same gap. And this was the official line.
Insane.
Well, hang on a minute. Like, you know, the official line just didn't stack up. And when the media was saying it's a bad investigation and everything, well, we got leaked because Mr. Harper's and Operation Rectangle was, if you like, mentored by the Homicide Working Group at the Association of Chief Police Officers. They published 4 reports. And basically in those reports, which were leaked to us, the bloggers, notably not the mainstream media again. Right. We published those reports, and in those reports, in one of them, I think it's APO 2 or 3 or 4. I think it's APO 3 and 4. It said this is how this is a prime example how an investigation of this sort should be managed. It was very highly praising of Operation Rectangle. I thought, well, hang on a minute, that's not what I'm reading in the mainstream media.
No, not at all. Not at all. No, according to mainstream media, Lenny Harper was an absolute danger who was creating stuff and nonsense about things. But obviously what that brought us to was Lenny was demonized in the press, no doubt about it. The investigation went on. It was apparent that something very serious had taken place in the care homes in Jersey. And what we ended up with was the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry, which I was listening to what Frances Olden said earlier, and she was, I believe, she was the chair. Was she the chair of that? Yeah. And what she had to say was absolutely damning and essentially vindicated what people like you and Lenny have known for a very long time. And as a consequence, so it's a small island with the power kept in a very small base amongst very few people. And that's what Lenny was dealing with, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Mr. Harper said, that your equivalent for the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, is our Attorney General. Well, it's not really, because our Attorney General wears many different hats. He's the sole prosecutor on this island. So if the Attorney General says, I'm not going to prosecute a case, well, that's it. That can't be appealed. That can't be judicially reviewed. We can't bring our own private prosecutions. So he wields a whole heck of a lot of power over here. But not only that, he advises the executive, but not only the executive, he advises the parliamentary scrutiny, parliamentary select committees, I think you call them, the scrutiny panels.
Right. So it's too much, isn't it? And Lenny, is it correct that you were advised not to return to the island when the care inquiry happened?
Yeah. Yes, I was warned by a lawyer on the island that if I attempted to go into the island, that I'd be arrested on some sort of trumped up charge. So I ended up giving my 3 or 4 days evidence from a room in Edinburgh. and if I could just go back, Sonia,
Please do.
To what Neil was mentioning there about the Attorney General being the prosecutor. Not only was the Attorney General the sole prosecutor, but the States of Jersey Police, who are the professional police force, did not have the power to charge on the island. The power to charge was held solely by the honorary police. So if we got prisoners in with a highly trained station officer, station sergeant, he had to call in an untrained farmer or grocer or somebody who was an honorary policeman to decide whether to charge. Now, this had serious implications for us in a lot of corruption charges, because I'll rush it through here, but one in particular comes to mind, a special branch detective who we had suspicions of. We filmed them doing some sexual activities with a foreign national in the special branch office, and then handing over secret anti-terrorist documents to her. We also had him on an audio recording giving out information to criminals. Now, we wanted to prosecute him, but they refused. The Attorney General refused to prosecute in the public interest. Another one where we had a police officer who was selling members of the public's registration numbers to criminals so that they could go and try and buy the cherished numbers. We caught him. We tried to charge him. The Attorney General refused to charge. So I got him charged with something that didn't need the Attorney General. In fact, I charged him with 100 minor offences. I got the centeneer to charge him with 100 minor. The honour police charged him with 100 minor offences. I didn't tell them the Attorney General had refused to charge him with the serious offences. But that caused an awful lot of hassle as well. So we didn't have the power to charge. The professional police force could not decide who to charge. It was the honorary police who charged, and the Attorney General, of course, was the titular head of the honorary police.
Right. So it was a pretty ghastly state of affairs, wasn't it? We know that there have been issues with Edward Heath on Jersey, Jimmy Savile on Jersey. There is a long history of child abuse allegations. There were issues with your specimen samples, you know, that went away and came back, and I think they didn't even represent what had been sent away. Was that the bones or was that the teeth? What was it? It changed.
It was a bit of the bone, and but not only was there a suspicion that the article itself had been changed, because when we sent it, we logged it out. We logged every movement. When it went across to the so-called laboratory in England, they handed it out willy-nilly to technicians and all the rest of it. When it came back, it had changed appearance, changed texture, changed weight, and everything else. But not only did that happen, they then what we used to call old-fashioned detectives used to call verbaled the anthropologist. They changed her. She said when it came back that it didn't look like the same article at all.
Right.
And when they did their press conference after I had retired, they said that she had changed her mind and said it wasn't bone. She never ever said that. So the whole thing was the evidence has been destroyed. They destroyed loads of evidence. They destroyed the teeth disappeared, the bath disappeared, that there was blood found in, bones disappeared. The whole lot just disappeared.
It's just terrible. And as Neil pointed out to me the other day, they even stated that there weren't any sellers. Isn't that correct, Neil?
Yeah, well, they did say that this is Mick Gradwell, who took over from Lenny after Lenny retired. And you've got to remember, he was found to have been leaking confidential police information to a journalist who's got history of defending convicted paedophiles.
Right.
So that all came out. And yeah, they said that he said there was no sellers. Well, I went up there with my camera. I was invited up by former Deputy Bob Hill, who was a 30-year Met Police veteran himself. And we filmed in the cellars. So, you know, you can't say they didn't exist. We filmed there, you know, 6 foot tall. They're trying to say they're about 3 foot voids. Well, we went up there with a video camera and showed that, you know, they did exist. And also Mr. Harper just mentioned the blood found by Keeler, the blood dog, on the bath in one of these cellars at Hotel Garen. Well, that bath was destroyed, and evidence was destroyed by Harper's predecessor. So the acting chief of police who came over, who took over from Graham Power, he admitted to destroying evidence. It was just one big,
absolute insanity. They wanted to keep the island looking like the ideal holiday destination, didn't they? And regardless of what children had been murdered, had been, violated, they wanted to create an idea that this was an idyllic state, a tax haven.
Yeah, and I think that was one of their biggest mistakes, really. I think one of their biggest mistakes was suspending the chief of police. Because I think they thought, well, get rid of the chief of police. That's Mr. Harper gone. That's Mr. Graham Power gone. We can carry on as normal. I think that's how it was sold to the then Home Affairs Minister, who suspended him.
Right.
I don't think they'd have known. Where are we now? We're 12 years later, and here we are. We're still talking about it.
Absolutely.
And I think it was said, look, nobody be talking about this in a couple of months, just get the job done. But, a huge travesty took place. The abuse itself was just horrendous, what the survivors went through. I sat through a lot of the hearings at the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry, and it was horrendous having to listen to them.
Right. And that's the ones who survived it.
Well, that's right. Because some of them said to me, it's only the lucky ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm sorry, I wish I'd have booked both of you for longer to talk at length with me, but I'd just like to go back to Lenny just briefly, and then I'll come back to you, Neil. And Lenny, reflecting back on all of this now, what is your sort of overview on Jersey's approach to tackling child abuse and corruption?
Well, it was awful, absolutely awful. The corruption, most of the corruption that I encountered was political corruption.
Yeah.
And it was endemic, and it ran right from the top through. And that led to the child abuse scandal, because the child abuse was in many ways government sponsored. It was sponsored by the state. So it was inevitable that the state would not want it uncovered, because it would shine a light on their activities. So the whole thing had an air of being inevitable right from the start. And their handling of the child abuse investigations over many, many, many years was abysmal and criminal. There should have been high-ranking Jersey politicians and officials in the dock, and that hasn't happened. When I left, there were at least 2 high-ranking childcare officials who were child abusers who were still in post.
Right. And Neil, you continue obviously journaling what is taking place on Jersey, because the corruption is still existing.
Yeah, I'm inundated. I don't blog as much as I did. I'm trying to get away from it, to be fair, but I'm inundated with people, not just about the child abuse, about the corruption that just keeps on going, whether there's planning corruption, all times. So it's still, what you've got to remember, Sonia, is everything that enabled the child abuse to go on for all those decades is still exactly in place now. So it's still the same sort of things in place now. Those who run the island are unaccountable and unelected. It's the law enforcement department, the Attorney General's office who run this island, and they're not. Then they go on to be, the titular head. They become the president of our legislature, as well as being the president of the judiciary.
Absolutely. So, where can people find your blog, Neil?
It's voiceforchildren at blogspot.com.
I want to thank you both very much. I'm sorry I don't have longer time, but Lenny Harper, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, as indeed it is to you as well, Neil. Thank you both very much for all the sterling work you've been prepared to put in under great intimidation, threats, ostracisation, all manner of things. But thank you. Thank you for being there, batting for our children. Thank you. Take good care of yourself. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
For having us.
Bye. Take care. Bye.